So if you're a fellow survival game enjoyer like me, you've doubtless heard of Enshrouded. It's been pretty hyped up and finally dropped recently, so I managed to free up some time and give it a go. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll already know that I am a Conan Exiles builder with over 3,700 hours spent mostly building stuff, so I was very curious about Enshrouded's building system. Of course, the first thing I did after I got out the tutorial cave was to work towards building a base. Quests, nah, they can wait. We gotta reach our architecture dreams first, and I was honestly really curious to see how the building system played out. I'd heard a lot of praise for it, but also a small amount of criticism, so I wanted to see for myself. Probably the closest point of comparison is of course going to be Valheim, a game I've played a lot of and spent a good amount of time building within. Whilst that comparison does appear to be at least somewhat relevant on the surface, the deeper you get into Enshrouded's building system, it's clear that it has its own identity. Much like something more akin to Minecraft, Enshrouded uses a voxel-based building system, which allows you to place pre-made blocks but also place each block individually if you prefer, and the game is all based on the world grid, where the world is essentially cut into small chunks which you can then build into. It's incredibly flexible, though it does have the slight downside of generally requiring a much larger time investment for any given building. Whilst it does require more time and effort, it is very rewarding for the detail-orientated architect. I do also really like that you can adjust and change the pre-made pieces by removing certain blocks, or simply just building them however you please from those individual 1x1 block pieces. Back to that Valheim comparison for just a moment, one of the very clear improvements is terraforming. It was functional enough in Valheim, but in my opinion far from outstanding. However, I think Enshrouded really does it right. You can still hack away at the ground with a pickaxe or flatten it with a rake if you need to, but you can also put a foundation in the ground, remove it, and you have a perfectly formed area in the dirt that you can then build, for example, a basement into. Terraforming is always a great thing to have, and the form it takes here is really good. Rebuilding the ground is not as smooth as breaking it is, using the building system to place down rock, dirt, or grass instead. It's pretty seamless though, and very easy to use. The currency of the building system is a little weird at first. It uses a resource called blocks, which you can craft 100 of at a time in the workbench, and then you can spend those blocks on walls, roofs, etc., which all have their individual block values. You also craft blocks out of the relevant materials. For example, if you need wood blocks, you use wood, stone for stone, you get the drift. Back to the block values though. For example, a 4 meter foundation is 256 blocks, and a 4 meter wall is 64, and so on and so forth. It appears to be essentially how many individual 1 voxel blocks go into that piece. It feels admittedly really strange at first to have sort of a building resource almost quantified like that, if that makes sense, and running back and forth to the workbench is a little annoying at times, but it does have its benefits. If you need to fill gaps with larger pieces, you only pay the block cost for the missing section rather than the whole wall, which I think is a really great quality of life choice. Additionally, if you have a build planned out beforehand, you know exactly how much you'll need and how much to craft, so that is a big bonus. The building menu, pretty decent too. It's a little complicated to navigate at first, but that's just part of the learning curve. It becomes streamlined pretty quickly. However, for as good as the building is, I don't think it's perfect as such. Pieces natively snap to the world grid, like I mentioned earlier, which is very helpful, though they sometimes tend to misbehave. This is way more of an issue when you turn the snapping option off, but when you turn it on, it also doesn't always go where you want it to, so there's occasions that demand the use of both modes. Of course, just like anything else, it does get easier as you build more and get used to the system, as there is most definitely quite a learning curve here, but it still does sometimes feel like you're fighting to get a piece in the right spot. Roofing in particular feels quite strange to me, and I think it's probably where most of my complaints about the piece snapping shows up. It can be made to work, but it requires a lot of precise manipulation, especially if you wanted to do something like a roof dormer. The open gable roofs are also a bit of a pain aesthetically, as it doesn't seem the stepped walls can slope to match the pitch of the roof. To be fair, having the notches in the sides of the roofs poking through is not as bad as it initially seems, but it does crop up a couple of small aesthetic issues that my fellow OCD builders might be irked by. Additionally, whilst the block system is good, it does feel kind of a bit convoluted. If you're working on something large or something you haven't pre-planned, you'll be making a lot of trips over to the workbench. I would have preferred them to be crafted in the inventory myself, and I can see this being even more of an issue in larger builds. However, being perfectly honest, it's really not the end of the world, it's just a smaller ease of use thing. Finally, a couple of more nuanced issues that I think probably pertain more to content creators but would also be good for people that just like building in general. First off, I would love a creative mode, not just for my builds but just for planning out structures that I can then rebuild in the survival world. Valheim has a roundabout creative mode with the developer console, which itself is honestly not perfect, but I would really like to see a proper full-fledged creative mode in Enshrouded. I also think some small adjustments to the building camera would be good, either an option to decouple it from the character within the build zone, or just to make your character semi or fully transparent whilst building, as your avatar does quite often get in the way when trying to place blocks. All that being said, Enshrouded is of course in early access and fresh off its release. The devs will doubtless be collecting information and feedback to make changes. So far, the building system does demand a fair investment of time and effort, and while it does have some issues and is missing smaller creative features, the bones are very good. This was quite literally my first build, so I haven't had chance just yet to try out any of the other building materials. I know there is a timber framed one, I'm a sucker for timber framed and I will probably love that, so I'm aiming to get my hands on that as soon as possible. As for the game overall, I think it's pretty good thus far. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on development. I think they've got a really good format here, not only in the building but in the gameplay too. I just really hope it doesn't fall into the Valheim problem, in that the game gets really good updates, it's just incredibly slow. So far though, for an early access product that has just released, Enshrouded is in a very good spot. And there we have it, my first impressions of the Enshrouded building system from the perspective of a Conan Exiles builder. Thanks for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. I'll definitely be playing more Enshrouded and playing around with the building system too. If you guys would like to see some more builds from Enshrouded, then do let me know, I'm very happy to do them. Also, if you've played Enshrouded, do let me know what you think of the build system in the comments below. Again, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.